We're continuing our conversation on 94.7 Blair Radio and BlairRadio.com as we have our local guest segments brought to us by Turnkey Nerds, 402-426-NERD. And we have Cassie joining us with Campbell-Aman. And we just, the first segment, just learning kind of a high view, level view of what you're doing and your background. A local individual making a business locally owned again. That's actually really great. It's you don't see that a lot in this day and age.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you and your family for being a part of that. But really, we want to talk about the kind of more in depth of the service because when you think of funeral homes, well, there's really one thought there. Somebody passed, and you go through that process, whether they have a service at a church or anything like that. But the funeral home, deals with the individual at that point in time. But it's bigger than that. You have all this other stuff going on, and so you as a service. What your job is to be able to help walk people through that grieving process or to help the future not be as difficult. So,
correct.
So let's kind of walk through a little bit of that.
Okay.
So at some point in time, unfortunately somebody has to give you a call, whether they're preparing down the future or they have something suddenly they have to, that somebody passed. So what is the first thing that people need to know in that situation?
So if someone has already passed away, it looks a lot different than if someone is prearranging for themselves or someone, a loved one. When we have someone that has passed, it's definitely more of what would you like to do? Burial versus cremation. And then we get into, Darren is, Darren, our funeral director, and he's the owner. He is the one that our families speak to in that situation. It's all with Darren. I help more with paperwork on the backside of things. But yeah, that's the first decision. And at that time, when someone has passed, the decisions have to be made pretty timely. We're not talking, like right now, right away, we give you time. But it is, that's the biggest decision that people have to make is, are we talking about burial or cremation? And then once you make that decision, it's okay, well, do you have cemetery plots? And where are we doing this? What day of the week? What time? There's a lot of aspects that we get into then from that standpoint. Where on the flip side, if we're doing pre-arrangements, we're having that discussion with the individual. So it's not saying, well, gosh, I don't know what mom would have wanted, or I don't know what dad wanted. It's more of, what do you want? Do you have cemetery plots? Do you want to be buried, or would you rather be cremated? So there's that decision is more on that individual instead of putting it on the kids or family members, when a lot of times we see that those conversations have never been had in the first place. So
because people want to avoid it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's not a fun conversation.
Right.
I would say that Darren and I are pretty fun people, but I don't think people usually come to us to have a good time.
Right.
So we try to make things as comfortable as we can, but it's just the nature of the business. It's not the most fun thing to take care of. But when we see that families come in and make those decisions for themselves instead of leaving them for their family members to try to figure out when the time comes, everyone is so much more relaxed. It's more of you're not questioning, gosh, is this what mom would have wanted? It's more of, we know what mom wanted. We're fulfilling her wishes. Everybody's a lot more at peace in those situations when a lot of the big decisions have been made. Right. So it's more of a celebration of life is what we're seeing. Funerals, there's a difference between funerals, memorial services, and celebrations of life. There's all sorts of definitions behind that. But we see that a lot more now. People are having more of a celebration of life because there's not all of this struggle between trying to figure out what to do. It's already been decided with prearrangement. They already know what the family members want. So it's nice to be able to fulfill those.
Have you seen, since COVID, has there been a change or a shift in anything?
I would say with COVID, like during COVID, because of the different regulations, things got spread out a little bit more. And because of that, we might have had some more cremations versus burial. But I would say largely in Blair, we're still a very rural community, and there's still a lot of burials. It's just what people are kind of accustomed to.
Sure.
So I can't say that COVID really, I mean, at the time, it definitely changed the way that we did services and the way that we conducted visitations. But everything kind of
But at this point in time, we're kind of back to where things have been.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Kind of business as usual.
All right. And then, but now if somebody's going through the process and somebody's passed, your job really kicks in at that point, doesn't it?
Yeah. So my, so I wear a lot of different hats in the funeral home. And when I'm dealing with people that have recently passed, I am there to help people along with insurance policies. So if they have an insurance policy from a different company, they're able to bring that in, and I can, start those initial calls, letting them know that someone's passed, initiating claim paperwork, different things like that. Luckily, those are the things that I deal with more frequently than anybody else most of the time. So I'm able to ask the right questions. It's just a lot quicker conversation for me versus when a family doesn't really know what they're asking.
Yeah.
So that's where I come in, to help, is asking those questions, getting the forms started. When we have families that are current, and they have different insurance policies, I can get the paperwork for them or request it, but a lot of times I have to wait for the family to receive it, and then I can help them from there. So it just is a longer process. The other hat that I wear is with pre-arrangement. So with pre-arrangement, if people, if someone's passed away and they pre-arranged, a lot of that process is completely on me, where I file the paperwork and receive the payment, and I say, okay, this is what the payment was. Either this is what you have coming back, or this was the difference. And it's just a lot quicker. It's a lot less for the family to have to take care of. They don't have to sign anything.
Right.
So that's where the pre-arrangement side comes in. So it's just a lot of paperwork for me, but I enjoy it, so it's good.
It takes a certain personality to enjoy paperwork.
Yeah, maybe a little crazy.
But in that situation at that time, individuals going through a lot of grief, that's one of the last things they want to deal with.
Yes, absolutely. On top of all of the phone calls they're receiving and all the people that want to help them, the last thing they want to do is sit down and do paperwork. And then everyone always worries of, okay, did I write that in the right spot, or is that the right number? And that's what I'm really there to help with. I have a lot of families that'll bring in their paperwork once they receive it. I sit down and go through it with them and say, okay, this is what I filled out. Here's where you need to sign. I'll fax it in. Fax is a lot of times quicker than the mail.
Right.
There's lots of different ways that I can figure out what's the quickest way that we can get this done. So,
do you ever come across a time where people are like, I have no idea what they have?
Yes, a lot.
How does that work?
A lot. Luckily, I would say that most people will know, okay, I know that Dad had an insurance policy, but I have no clue where it's at.
Right.
So at least we have some place to kind of start, and they can go looking for that information. It's really hard when people have absolutely no clue if someone had an insurance policy. It's hard for us to look for anything. The family really has to do the digging then.
Right.
We've actually had instances where families have pre-arranged, so they paid for the funeral beforehand, and they didn't tell their kids.
Oh.
Yeah. So that actually, and that sounds very odd. That might be my favorite situation, because the family will come in, they'll say, well, we didn't really know what Dad wanted. And we'll say, well, Dad pre-arranged and everything's paid for. And the family's just the huge sigh of relief. It's a huge weight lifted off of their shoulders. But, and especially in those situations where families didn't know that, that's a huge help. You can tell they never had those tough conversations with their parents. But yeah, those ones are definitely my favorite, because the family is just more at ease, and we can figure out, okay, this is what Dad wanted. Now it's a lot calmer process. They can do their grieving and work through the passing a lot easier than having to worry about all of the paperwork side of things before they're able to do that.
They can let go and go through the grieving process instead of having to stop and then be reminded all the time as they do paperwork.
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
So,
well, we're going to come back one more time, and then we're going to talk about how people can learn about being prepared right here on 94.7 BlairRadio.com.